To have you here. My name is John Hamry. I'm the president at CSIS. I'm wearing we give blood today. We've got a blood drive going on next door, and I interrupted. I got registered, but I didn't have time to give, so I'm going to go over and hook myself up in just a minute, and something I hope everybody has a chance to do. First of all, before we begin, and when we have groups from the outside, we always do is start with a little safety announcement. And so where's John Hillman? He's the responsible safety officer. He's going to take care of you. If anything happens, you'll hear an announcement. We've never had this happen, by the way. But if you do hear it, you're going to follow John. John's going to take you through that door. Right 5 feet away is the stairs that goes down to the street. We're going to go down to the street. We'll take 2 left-hand turns, and then we'll cross M Street over to the courtyard for National Geographic. We have kind of a mutual support arrangement with them, and I'll order ice cream, and we'll have a party instead. But nothing's going to happen, but I just want you to know there are plans in case we do have to ask for your help. This is one of the most interesting conferences that we'll have at CSIS this year, and probably one of the most interesting that we've ever had here. And I need to just say a few words why. First, I have to admit profound ignorance about this very important work that people are doing to improve road safety. I mean, I was unaware of this, and kind of when John Hillman, I'm not still quite sure how this got started, and John said we're going to do a project inside Reconnecting Asia, working with about highway safety. And I was surprised to learn how very important this is. And you're going to hear more of that today from our panel participants. There's this enormous program underway throughout Asia, which is building out highways, railroads, airports, etc. The massive construction of new infrastructure. Boy, as if there ever was a time to bring in, preparation, prophylactic things, such as designing roads in a safe way, now is the time to do it. And so it's very important to hear that. So there's several things that are important about this meeting. One is we're going to introduce you to Reconnecting Asia. I think probably John or Matt, you'll say a word about this. This is, in China it's called One Belt, One Road. The Koreans call it the New Silk Route. Different terms, but it's about this enormous construction project that's underway throughout Asia that's connecting Asia internally again. We call it Reconnecting Asia because it really reflects an epochal change. In the 1600s, when the European empires started spreading, for colonies all around the world, it had the impact of bringing the creative energies to the coastline. And it brought international commerce, which exploded to the coastline. But the natural interior communication is organic through the old Silk Route. Now, the old Silk Route was very thin. There was a reason it was called silk. It was not called the iron ore route. You couldn't afford to haul iron ore on a camel. You could afford to haul silk. But now you're starting to see markets that are demanding internal transportation. And a container ship that leaves Shanghai to go to Rotterdam will take 43 days. But if it goes overland, it'll take 13 days. An enormous economic push to create this internal market again. And it has genuinely huge geostrategic significance. Just an example is, in the United States, you go to the State Department, we have an East Asia Bureau, a South Asia Bureau, a Near East Asia Bureau. We're looking at Asia from the coastline. Because that's the history of the colonial era. We weren't the colonialists, but that was the world we inherited. We don't look at Asia as it is growing internally. So this is a project for us to try to look at this huge internal dynamic. And we built this platform, which Matt will show you, designed for collaboration. It's not, there's no sovereignty issues here. We're not taking anybody's sides. We're just posting all the information. We've got about 2,000 projects that have been logged on this website. And we're looking for collaborators that can help us look at issues associated with it. This is the first one. Now, this is also unique because we did something we've never done before. We created a virtual research team. And this was brand new to us. We recruited people, engineers, geographers, economists, people to come together who had never been together. We're going to hear about probably the challenges of all of that. Never been together as a team, and made them into a team virtually to put together this report. Absolutely new for us. But there's such enormous talent in the world. If we could bring it to a focus, I think we have huge new opportunities to both invent new ideas and to promote better ideas around the world. That's the whole purpose of this effort. So it's really exciting. You're all pioneers on something brand new. And I'm so excited to learn more about how it went for you. We're going to have to do an after action to figure out, how do we improve this model? So look forward to this conference very much. I'm very glad that you're all here. Matt, I think you're going to take things off for real. So let me turn, this is Matt Goodman, who heads up our Reconnecting Asia project, working with John Hillman. Now I got to go give blood.
Yes, that's right. Thanks. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Hamre. We really appreciate your participating and also your service in giving blood. I hope all CSIS people listening are participating. I actually cannot give blood because I lived in the UK during the mad cow disease, and every time I try to go and give blood, they tell me I can't if you live there, sadly. Welcome, everybody. Let me echo the welcome that Dr. Hamre gave to CSIS and to this project. As he said, I'm Matthew Goodman. I hold the Simon Chair in Political Economy, and I also oversee, in a broad sense, but I don't have to do much of the work, which is good, the Reconnecting Asia project. Before I talk a little about that and this project, let me just first of all thank Caterpillar Inc., Bechtel Group, and the International Road Federation for making this event and this project possible. We really appreciate that support. We couldn't do what we do without that support. So I had no idea when we launched this project about a year ago that it would lead us to road safety, a topic that, of course, as a citizen, we're all sort of aware of, but I think I didn't realize how important and impactful this subject was and how many people are thinking about it and working on it. And so we're going to get a taste of that today, and it's really interesting. I've certainly learned a lot already and look forward to learning more. As Dr. Hamre said, this project is a mapping project of trying to provide a kind of ground truth, ground reality of what's actually happening in this infrastructure story across the broadly defined Eurasian landmass. And we have, as he said, about 1,800 projects so far, and we're adding ones every day. And we're trying to just understand what's actually happening and then sort of why it's happening and what its implications are. And this is one of the implications. We're delighted to be sort of diving into this today. And it's particularly a big deal, this topic of road safety, for Central Asian countries, including Kazakhstan, which is right at the heart of this Reconnecting Asia story. Road accidents cost Kazakhstan an estimated 4% of its GDP every year. I mean, that's a huge number. As an economist, if you told me something's going to affect the economy, good or bad, to the extent of 4%, I'd say, wow, that's a big issue. Obviously, driver behavior, raising public awareness, driving culture has a lot to do with the problem, but the hard infrastructure itself and bringing the highways up to international standards is also a very important part of solving this problem. So it's an important part of our story. It's also the life work of a lot of interesting people that I had no idea were involved in this. The Right Honorable Lord Robertson of Port Ellen, who is former Defense Secretary of the United Kingdom. He's also former Secretary General of NATO and chairman of the FIA Foundation, a road safety philanthropy that aims to ensure safe, clean, fair, and green mobility, is a champion of road safety. Unfortunately, we can't have him personally join us. He actually really wanted to be here, but he did us the favor of producing a little video and talking about the human and economic toll from road accidents. So then after that, John Hillman, who's director of the Reconnecting Asia project, will come up here with some of the participants and some other experts to talk about this. And so we're delighted to have that part of this event today. So with no further ado, if we can dim the lights and cue the video, Chris, thanks a lot.
I warmly welcome the launch of the Reconnecting Asia project, and I commend the Centre for Strategic and International Studies for leading this initiative on road safe infrastructure. As a former NATO Secretary General, I am familiar with the cold calculus of potential body counts applied in assessing threats to national security, but I'm still taken aback by our collective failure to face up to one of the gravest and most preventable security risks that face people. That is the risk of death and disability on the world's roads. More than 1.2 million people are killed each year around the world, and tens of millions more are injured. The vast majority of these casualties are in low and middle income countries, and many of them are experiencing rapid motorization. But this is an epidemic which strikes everywhere. For example, at current rates, every 3 years, the United States loses more people to road traffic crashes than the total combined US combat deaths from the Korean and the Vietnam Wars. Indeed, had somebody shown me the body count numbers when I was at NATO, I would have assumed that I was looking at the impact of a high-intensity civil conflict. I might have anticipated campaigns for humanitarian intervention, yet for the most part, and despite our successful campaign to include road safety targets in the Sustainable Development Goals, many governments and donors still turn a blind eye. Now this has to change, and one of the main fallacies is that road traffic injuries are the collateral damage of development itself, some inevitable consequence of the investment in transport infrastructure and the growing demand for vehicles. Well, this type of thoughtless fatalism actually costs lives. The causes and the simple preventative cures are well known, and with political commitment and attention to detail, they can be implemented. For example, tens of thousands of children die each year because major highways are routed between their homes, often in informal slums and schools. Try to imagine for a moment sending your 7-year-old off on a daily journey that involves negotiating a 6-lane highway. So focusing on our infrastructure and ensuring that roads are designed for people with vehicle speeds that are appropriate both in road design and the mix of people using the road is absolutely crucial. And that is the basis of the safe system. That's why the focus of your initiative is so important and so welcome. With billions of dollars being invested in new or upgraded highways in Asia, there is an opportunity to build in safety design that will protect people for decades to come. On the other hand, get it wrong now, and governments will see much of the economic benefit that they anticipate from improved trade routes and connectivity simply being squandered in the spiraling trauma and long-term healthcare costs. The FIA Foundation, which I chair, is also working to set infrastructure investment on a sustainable path. We're the core donor for the International Road Assessment Programme, IRAP, which works with governments, cities, and multilateral development banks in more than 80 countries. The program provides a layer of transparency for policymakers and for the public by assessing and star rating the safety of roads from national highways to city streets. So in countries ranging from the UK to China, from India to Australia, and in the Federal Highway Safety Administration here in the US, these road assessment protocols are helping to guide policy, identifying dangerous design, and the measures needed to remedy them. In China, where the government has a road assessment research team of more than 70 people, 150,000 kilometers of road has been assessed. And it's estimated that as a result of safety upgrades resulting from this work, more than 11,000 deaths and serious injuries were prevented in China just last year. Road crashes typically cost developing countries from 1% to 3% of national income each year. Infrastructure safety is therefore proven to be a cost-effective investment, particularly when integrated into wider construction or maintenance projects. Research undertaken for us by social impact experts in Australia, who forensically calculated the real health costs of road traffic injuries, found that early investment in safe infrastructure pays for itself 3 times over. So the question that finance ministers should ask themselves is this: not whether road safety is affordable, but whether they can afford not to act. So I commend strongly your report, your initiative, and your leadership. Let's work together to tackle this tragic and preventable carnage and save more lives. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I'll just introduce our panelists in just a moment, but I wanted to actually start with something I overheard at the Belt and Road Forum last month in Beijing. So this was China's largest diplomatic gathering of the year. Some 30 or so foreign leaders, representatives from another 110 countries and international organizations. And during one of the breakout sessions, a scholar took issue with the branding of the Belt and Road. He said, you guys had the Silk Road, that's such a great image. Then you had One Belt, One Road, which is a little confusing because the road goes across the ocean, the belt goes over land. And he said, now you have Belt and Road, which sounds like a road safety advertisement. And so little did he know, we were hard at work on this report. And I think we take that criticism now as actually a compliment. This has been a very collaborative effort, and I want to start by thanking a few people who did the heavy lifting. So we have, as Matt mentioned, a few of our scholars here today in the front row, and I hope the rest are tuning in from around the world. They were supported by a very talented team of researchers here at CSIS. Our team here geotagged 13,000 kilometers of highway. And so many of those researchers have never been to Kazakhstan, but I think could give you driving directions if you needed them. And I also want to thank the International Road Federation for being a really terrific partner and for teaching us about an issue that we had overlooked. They've got a great fellowship program, and as I recently learned, they also have something called the Rhodes Scholar Program, which is about as good as branding gets. So we've actually got 2 IRF affiliates here today on our panel. Let me start by introducing them. To my right, we have Brendan Halliman, who's the Vice President for Europe and Central Asia for the International Road Federation. And next to Brendan, we have Georges Boussab, who's a fellow with the International Road Federation and led our research team for this project. To my left, we have Rochelle Sobol, who is the founder and president of the Association for Safe International Road Travel. And next to her, we have Mark Schotten, who is the program manager at the World Bank for the World Bank's Global Road Safety Facility. So I'd actually like to start by turning to you, Rochelle, and asking if you could help us put these global challenges into a bit of context. What's at stake here? And if you could, why is this something that Americans should care about?
Thank you very much for the privilege of being here. I'm going to take you a little bit out of the statistics for a moment. We've heard from Lord Robertson that 1.2 million people die each year on the roads of the world. And that you may also realize, if you do the math, that 3,400 people perish every day in a road crash somewhere in the world. For my family, for me, and for far too many people all over the world, this is not an abstract statistic. It is not a calculation. It is very personal. On May 3rd, 1995, my 25-year-old son, Aaron, was killed along with 23 other people in a bus crash on the Bodrum-Izmir Highway in Turkey. Aaron was a senior medical school student at the University of Maryland. He had just completed his medical rotation by volunteering in a hospital abroad, and then decided to tour Turkey for 4 days before coming home to graduate. The crash was caused by a convergence of factors. It was, if you will, a systems failure. According to the police report, the driver was speeding down the wrong lane of a narrow, winding, deteriorated 2-lane highway with no guardrail. The bus hit oncoming traffic, careened, plunged down a deep ravine, landing on its side. The crash occurred before a Bayram, a Turkish holiday. The driver was fatigued from driving too many hours overtime. He had been directed by the bus company to load as many passengers as possible onto the bus. The bus itself had a very high center of gravity, and of course it was not equipped with seatbelts. And due to the crowded roads and the paucity of emergency vehicles, the ambulance, which could have administered medical care to the injured, arrived upon the scene too late. Among the dead were Turkish citizens, many on their way home to join their family for the Bayram holiday, as well as tourists and businessmen from many countries. And that is the context, is it not? In a very real sense, as we travel the roads of the world for work, business, pleasure, study, and humanitarian activity, we are all vulnerable road users. If you will, we are all on the bus together, and the roads in which we travel have become, like the seas and the air, global. What is or is not done on the roads of one country has the power to affect us all. And I will expand your logo and say, we are one world, one road. According to the Counselor Division of the U.S. Department of State, which since 2002 has been collecting and making available data on the numbers of American citizens who die in a foreign country from non-natural causes, road crashes are the leading cause of death for healthy U.S. citizens traveling abroad. Americans are traveling increasingly to mid-economic and developing countries where the chance of being killed on the roads is many times greater than in the U.S. And the U.S. itself, by the way, does not have the best road safety record among developed nations. They are unaware, not only Americans, but all travelers are unaware of the specific risks that they will encounter as a result of dangerous and inadequate infrastructure and road design, poor road management, weak road safety codes, lax road safety enforcement, unsafe, unroadworthy private and public vehicles lacking basic safety features, untrained or non-compliant drivers, and an unfamiliar and often challenging road culture. The U.S. has 14 crash fatalities per 100,000 people per year. Namibia has 45, Thailand 44, Venezuela 35, Dominican Republic 32. I could go on, but you get the picture. Clearly, in today's interconnected economy, travel is an essential part of doing business. Last year, more than 8% of the Americans traveling to international U.S. destinations. U.S. residents logged 457.4 million trips for business purposes in 2016. The number of U.S. citizens studying and traveling abroad has more than doubled in the last 15 years. Students are opting increasingly for more exotic study and travel destinations. The Senator Paul Simon Study Abroad Program Act to expand number of U.S. citizens traveling abroad encourages non-traditional locations, but that is where the worst traffic records exist. Through organizations and agencies or individual activities, many thousands of people often become involved in humanitarian and disaster relief efforts, necessitating travel to mid-economic and developing countries with high crash rates. Road crashes are a global issue. We must act globally to protect both citizens of and travelers to countries. Road crashes are estimated to be the 8th leading cause of death worldwide and the leading cause for young people, 15 to 29. Unless further, more aggressive action is taken, they are estimated to become the 7th leading cause by 2030. I must say this is a far more optimistic number than the earlier projections of road safety community. According to the Global Status Report on Road Safety, in 2015, the total number of road traffic deaths has actually plateaued despite the world population growth and increased motorization. And what this proves is what the road safety community has said all along. Road crashes are preventable. Through legislation, implementation, enforcement of key road safety interventions, safer roads and vehicles, we can significantly reduce road deaths. But progress is far too slow. Accelerated and urgent action is necessary to reduce the devastating number of road fatalities that destroy lives and bring heartbreak to families. We must work together so that beautiful young hopes are not shattered on the roads of the world of our planet. We must work together so that the errands of the world, traveling in their own countries or abroad, can return safely home to fulfill their dreams. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you mentioned, the statistics are compelling and I think shocking to some of us who hadn't really been aware of the scale of this challenge, but it really is the stories and the human dimension that I think galvanizes action. So thank you for sharing your story, and thank you also for the work that you've done. As a consequence of that work and the road safety community's work, I sense that there's been some progress. There's been maybe a bit of a shift over the past decade or so. Mark, your group just celebrated its 10th year anniversary, maybe last year. Could you tell us a bit about, at the World Bank, from your perspective, how has the international community's approach changed to these issues?
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks as well to CSIS for this invitation and really what is an excellent report. It's a great question. I sort of came to this topic originally actually looking at infrastructure provision in East Asia. And at the World Bank, which as an international development institution probably puts around $5 billion a year in new transportation loans. It's one of the largest portfolios in the World Bank. During my time in the East Asia group, looking at the future of infrastructure provision, barely touched on the subject of safety. And it's quite shocking in retrospect to me how little the topic has been acknowledged as a development issue. You heard about these numbers from Rochelle, literally the leading killer of young people worldwide. And it's not just 15 to 29. Once you get into the 29 to 39 category and out, I mean, it's still quite high up there. And so really in the last 10 years, what I've seen, and I joined the Global Road Safety Facility at its inception around 2005, there has been some shifts that I can talk about. But I consider the modern era of road safety to have begun right around 2004. At that time, there were some actions taken by the World Bank and World Health Organization to put out a major international report. There was the first UN resolutions on road safety, and there have been subsequent resolutions basically every 2 years since 2004. There was a World Health Assembly resolution, which delineated the problem from a health-specific perspective. And then, I mean, I'm not sure how many of you follow the subject, but I'd be surprised if everybody in the room knew that we are actually in the middle of a UN Decade for Action for Road Safety. And achieving UN resolutions for a topic to create a decade of action, of which there are several in other areas, is not an easy thing to do. You essentially need to have the governments of the world at the UN General Assembly commit to the resolution and the actions within that. We've had 2 UN ministerial meetings on this, major global ministerial meetings, 2009, hosted by the Russian Federation, and just a few years ago in 2015 in Brazil. And finally, under the Sustainable Development Goals from 2015, road safety was acknowledged as an issue. It's in Goal 3 under health, with a target reduction of reducing global fatalities by 2020. We're not going to get there. Unfortunately, it was actually, we really should have targeted it for 2030. And it is actually mentioned as well in the Goal 11 on cities. So what's been really helpful, to the point of your question, over the last 10 years is we're in the game, as it were, as an international development subject. We were left out, as transport was generally, during the creation of the Millennial Development Goals, the MDGs. So it's quite helpful, even though there are many targets in the Sustainable Development Goals, to have a road safety specific target. So that's good. Unfortunately, as we were talking about in the room before this conference began, this session began, this is a subject that people are discovering every day. I didn't know the numbers on road safety. Wow, it's amazing how big they are. I can't believe it's the #1 killer of the young worldwide. And we face this time and time again when we go to ministries of finance and transport and economy and interior, education, all the subject areas which make up the multi-sectoral spectrum that needs to be addressed to have a comprehensive road safety system. Like you, I cannot give blood because I lived in the UK during the mad cow disease era. But I noticed during that period when I was there how amazingly different that system was in the UK, which is generally ranked #1 in the world, compared to the United States. And from my travels from the United States to around 50 developing countries now, it is just a smorgasbord of kind of competencies. So the last 10 years, what I think has changed is an awareness is better, but what hasn't changed necessarily is the varying levels of political attention, of internal resources needed for the issue, and really a human capital issue. In India, where probably 20 kilometers of high-speed network are being built every day, talking about something like the safe system approach, which is the benchmark for good international practice, which basically is how do you target the reduction of human fatalities on your network. And really in any given network, around 80% of the total social cost of death and injury can be found about 20% of that network to target. But in places like India and other middle-income countries, and especially low-income countries, having a mature discussion about the topic and how do you actually target the interventions in these specific corridors or in these sections, it's just not easy to do, frankly, because there isn't the human capital in the engineering, in the enforcement, there isn't the equipment to do this. So it is a very tough sell when you're trying to, and this is an amazing project because you're basically, it's a infrastructure asset management type tool you've created. You're looking on that and you're trying to basically ask, as we're developing these roads, how many people do you want to kill on these roads every year? And it requires a very mature discussion about the types of interventions. So I would say we are progressing in the last 10 years because we're now in the game and the subject is being realized, but we are far, far, far from being able to reach kind of a global critical tipping point on the road safety subject. So much more political attention is needed. Groups like the FIA Foundation, and a shout out to Natalie Drazen, who's the US representative here, works with Lord Robertson. They're doing a really amazing work in international awareness. But we are far, far away from where we need to be. Last point, the numbers have shown to be plateaued. I don't buy them. The WHO report is a self-reporting government self-reporting report done every couple of years. We are looking at anywhere from 100% to 500% underreporting on road crashes in developing countries. And that 1 to 3% of GDP, we've calculated as high as 10% of GDP loss in some African countries. Nigeria has reported 5,000 road death fatalities per year. for the global status report, for the last 2 status reports. If you flip to the back of the global status report from WHO, the estimated fatalities that WHO are calculating in Nigeria is anywhere from 45,000 to 55,000. That's how bad the underreporting is in the countries. So,
It's a really compelling point about the challenges of the data collection and the reporting. I mean, it's something we struggled with as we were doing the analysis here, and something that I hope Georges will tell us a bit about. But you also mentioned resources being a big issue here. We also know that there's this huge infrastructure push underway, and that's something we're tracking with the Reconnecting Asia project. So you can see on our map this immense amount of activity, lots of building underway. And you can see also very visibly that Kazakhstan is literally at the center of many of these connectivity initiatives. And so, Brendan, you're leading the International Road Federation's work on Central Asia and Europe. There's a lot of activity, many ambitious initiatives underway across the region. Kazakhstan's right in the middle of it. Why should road safety be on the agenda for those initiatives?
Right, thank you, John. And there's obviously an opportunity to begin by thanking CSIS. I think I speak on behalf of the International Road Federation and the fellows present in the room to state that it was a privilege to contribute to this collaborative endeavour. So in order to fully answer your question, I think we need to take a bit of a step back and recall some of the root causes behind the frenzied construction going on currently in Kazakhstan and its neighbouring countries. We've heard already a bit today in the introductions about the Belt and Road Initiative, as it's now rebranded, which really at its most basic is a collage of trade routes between Chinese provinces and markets in Western Europe and Asia. And I use the word collage with all its fuzzy and even artistic connotation, in the sense that it's often said, sometimes said in Beijing, that if you want a project approved, you can just claim it's a Belt and Road Initiative project, and that will generally fast track its approval. The drive, as we know, is of course part of a broader strategic effort by China's policymakers, both to utilize their excess industrial capacity and to project their diplomatic supremacy in the region, which I think is an angle that probably resonates quite well with a think tank like CSIS. As you said, John, due to its size, due to its geography, Kazakhstan is very much central to the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, it's sometimes has been described as the buckle of the belt. Not just, of course, to the Belt and Road Initiative, but to other infrastructure programs such as the CARIC corridors and the Asian Highway Network, both of which were reviewed as part of the study. So it's precisely because of these geostrategic considerations and its own change in economic profile, in particular with a burgeoning middle class, growing motorization rates, that Kazakhstan is the sort of middle-income country that really should be paying a lot more attention to its road traffic injury problem. And I think there's general consensus among the panelists that more should be done on this front. It's also fair to say that Kazakhstan has started to embrace the type of institutional reform process, road safety, and start introducing road safety governance improvements that are typically formulated by the World Bank, other development banks, and road safety partners that Kazakhstan works with. And these have already translated into a more visible effort to get different agencies to work with one another and to start strengthening some of its road safety legislation. Although a lot of that is still predicated around the old fix the driver approach, or as the Kazakhstan's Minister of Interior Affairs coined it last month, strict measures of administrative coercion, which probably in the original language sounds a lot worse. We have at the IRF, we've always, when we look at these programs, we look at the underlying investments, we do see an opportunity to get things right, from the start and ensure that key safety considerations are mainstreamed into these new highway programs. Or, as Lord Robertson noted in his introduction, avoid situations where danger is designed into the road. So how do we achieve this? Well, typically through sound construction standards, pipeline, state-of-the-art engineering practices, in particular to ensure that the pavement possesses the necessary resilience characteristics, to avoid cracking and rutting, for instance. Also by ensuring that facilities for vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians, such as cyclists, etc., are included, in the blueprint of these programs from the start, and not something that people think about much later on at the planning and design stage. And also, of course, that the safety equipment, so from road signs, guardrails, median barriers, etc., are properly identified and function as intended. And I think the report includes a number of engineering, safety engineering recommendations, which I encourage all of you to consult. We also believe very strongly in preventive risk identification measures, such as road safety impact assessments and road safety audits, which can be undertaken at different stages of the roads project, and ideally at the planning, design, and pre-opening stages, certainly. And these, the common characteristics of these different risk identification measures is that they are an independent review of the safety characteristics of these roads, and they effectively assess the measure of risk, and as Mark put it earlier on, the likelihood that this risk will in fact translate into a serious injury or fatality. And it's clearly the case that when multilateral development banks, such as the World Bank, start mandating road safety audits, it does send an essential signal to national road authorities. And I think that anyone who goes through the report will be strongly encouraged to introduce these risk identification measures.
Thank you. That's a great segue into the report itself. And so George has spent a lot of time actually grappling with the data, which was not always the easiest thing, but did that gracefully, and we ended up with a pretty good report with some recommendations. Could you tell us a bit about the process and your view of the data that you looked at, the link between hard infrastructure and road safety, and the recommendations in the report?
Sure. Before I start, I would like to thank CSIS for believing in us to lead the project. Now, I was the team lead for the research team, and over here we have Yunzi. She was the leader for the mapping team. I remember we used to have phone conversations at 12 a.m., 1 a.m. because we had very busy schedules at school, and I always told my team, although I was the team lead, we all worked as one team. I learned from their experiences. They provided a lot of input. So thank you for whoever was able to attend today. And talking about road safety and infrastructure, what's the link? If you're talking about roadway safety, you have three main pillars that affect roadway safety. You have the roadway user, you have the vehicle technology, and the infrastructure. And they all play an important role towards roadway safety. For example, for the road user, you have either a fatigue driver or you have a reckless driver that you can probably address that issue. But in terms of infrastructure, there's a lot of, there is a big, how can I say that? There is a way that you can address these infrastructure issues. For example, I'm originally from Lebanon, so I am from Asia or the Middle East, but I was born and raised and I lived in Dubai, so I have two different perspectives. Dubai, where it's becoming more of a developed country and they're trying to meet all these international roadway design standards, and in Lebanon, we do lack the proper infrastructure designs, and I think recently the World Bank awarded Lebanon millions of dollars to help revive the infrastructure. I know in Lebanon they do a lot of campaigns again, to help the youth and trying to tell the youth that drinking and driving is really bad and how it impacts them and their families. But at the same time, infrastructure in Lebanon is in pretty bad shape, I would say. And so thank you to the World Bank. Hopefully we'll see good results. And it's also evident in Kazakhstan because 76% of the roadways are two-lane roadways and they're undivided. So trying to improve that infrastructure would definitely reduce a lot of the crashes. And if you read the report, the majority of the crashes were head-on crashes or they were single crashes run off the road. So trying to address these issues would definitely reduce the crashes and especially fatalities and the major injuries. As you can also tell from the report, the crashes that happened in Kazakhstan, 50% of them led to a fatal crash or to a really serious injury. And if you look at different research, trying to improve the infrastructure definitely helps reduce fatalities and crashes in general. For example, if you only try to change the divided roadway, the undivided roadway to a divided roadway, that would significantly reduce the fatalities and the crashes. Or even if you change the unpaved shoulders to paved shoulders, that would reduce these fatalities. I'm not sure if most of you are familiar with the crash modification clearance house. It's a publicly available resource, and research has shown that by implementing these countermeasures or safety improvement initiatives would definitely reduce these crashes or accidents. For example, if you have a roadway crash and you implement a certain strategy and you have a crash modification factor of 0.8, you just multiply that factor by the number of accidents that you initially had, that would result in how much a reduction in fatalities or in a certain type of crash you would have later on. So it's pretty important to address this issue in terms of infrastructure.
Thank you. And we have, for the more advanced report users like George's, we have an appendix with, we even had some equations in this report, which is not every CSIS report has actual math in it. So it's a small accomplishment for us. But I think speaks to the seriousness with which you guys approach this and the rigor of your analysis. Brendan, I want to turn back to you and just ask a basic question. I think having been through this project now, I have a much better appreciation for the fact that a road is not always a road is a road. There's really dramatic differences in quality, and this is something we're interested in. If you look at our map, you can see if a road exists or doesn't exist, but you can't see what that road is, the condition of it. We have some satellite imagery that sometimes gets at that. But this is a big issue because there are different approaches. Could you speak to that, and maybe also sort of what is the private sector's role in the different approaches that exist?
Yes, absolutely. So we've always made the case that a road is more than a strip of asphalt or concrete, and the distinction between a safe road project and an unsafe road project goes beyond purely physical characteristics, and this gives me an opportunity to say a few words about the important role of strengthening road safety engineering capacity, which is not necessarily something that you're going to pick up in satellite imagery, but it's clear to us that skills development, knowledge transfer, all of these programs will put Kazakhstan and other countries on the pathway to more sustained road safety results. And these programs take many forms: on-the-job training, e-learning, increasingly scanning tools, professional certification, investing in your talent, in particular in the next generation of road professionals, road managers, and the International Road Federation's fellowship program is a wonderful example of that. I think the common characteristic of these different programs is that they are incredibly cost effective relative to the scale of the infrastructure investments that we were discussing earlier. And certainly we'd like to see a more systematic effort when these road projects are being financed and launched to systematically inventory what skills currently exist on the ground, where gaps are, and what measures exist to actually bridge these gaps over time. For instance, we spoke about road safety audits and their importance earlier. We do want to avoid a situation where safety audits are simply a box that's checked in a project report, or in the worst case, where a road safety audit is undertaken by a underqualified personnel, because of course this will reflect into the quality of the ensuing recommendations. Or in some cases where the process is entirely owned by foreign specialists who come in, conduct a safety audit, and then return to their, Sweden or Australia, which are great safety auditors. But I think they're not around to see those recommendations put into action, and we really want to move to a situation where that talent is built, from the ground up. IRF has launched recently a global certification program for road safety audit team leaders that hopes to achieve a better benchmarking and a common standard for the type of skills that are required to conduct these safety audits. And we work with governments around the world to introduce domestic road safety auditor training programs. You asked about the role of the private sector. I think it's fair to say that we've seen a number of wonderful initiatives introduced by contractors, and some of whom I think are represented in the room today, really to work with the community in the countries where they operate, work with a range of stakeholders, universities, etc., to really build talent, from the ground up. As we said earlier, roads are more than just a strip of asphalt. Roads are. There is a legacy component to it, in the sense that those soft skills, that capacity that is, in a sense, that comes along with the road project is an essential part of the socio-economic benefit of the road that is being built. And again, we have seen a number of contractors embrace this approach through a number of sophisticated upskilling initiatives, and this obviously also talks to the road safety objectives.
Thank you. Thanks. So yeah, I think it's sometimes it's easy for us to obviously suggest that this needs to be done without having to necessarily spend our own money on it, or to be the person in the decision-making seat, making the trade-offs between paying for a certain way of building a road versus another way. Mark, I was wondering if you could actually, from your vantage point at the World Bank, tell us a bit about what that dilemma is like from the perspective of a country who's thinking about making these trade-offs. How do you, what is the sales pitch? What kind of training or cost estimates are we encouraging people to take?
Yeah. It's a great question, because there are, especially in some post-conflict countries in Africa and elsewhere, there are some real trade-offs when you're trying to think about what your priorities are as a development minister or the prime minister or minister, et cetera. So, part of the message you're hearing today is that there is sort of this unknown epidemic out there, now known a little bit better, and that you don't necessarily need to make that trade-off. And actually, if you want to get on a pathway for development, which is going to save lives and save money down the road, tackling road safety as a management kind of initiative by the government or by a state or by a municipality is something that you should get on top of as soon as possible. So, around 80% of all the world's road crashes are happening in middle-income countries, and these are not necessarily countries that need international development aid so much anymore, right? Brazil, China, et cetera. I mean, these are countries that are now making development aid loans to countries in Africa, for example. So the question then becomes, basically, when we're talking about those trade-offs to a government agency, and Brendan alluded to this, there are many things that go into road safety on a road. It's not just a road. You know, a road is an emblematic thing of basically what is the country's road safety management capacity. So when we go into a country and we're talking about trying to build in road safety as a development priority, my program, the Global Road Safety Facility, is actually offering grants, free donor aid, to try to get governments to do a type of capacity review to see where their road safety management is. But look, road safety can be built like any other widget. There's a process, right? And this could be the same for any development issue. You're trying to do something at the end, right? If you think of it as a pyramid, at the top, you're trying to reduce fatalities on the network. Now, I think the issue in the last 30 to 50 years, including here in the United States, is most of the focus is on the middle part of the pyramid, which is where the interventions are occurring. And those are things like, how is your post-crash care system operating? Do you have enforcement? What is the vehicle quality, the regulations on imports or production of vehicles, and on road building? And you know, as Brendan said, the consulting community can go into a country, an international auditor or international road safety consultant, and tell the country there's like 500 things wrong with your road safety management system, and you know, here's everything you need to do. The problem is most countries don't know how to systematically apply those 500 things because they don't have the bottom of the pyramid, the foundation, the institutional apparatus to actually coordinate those interventions. So a road is not just a road, right? It's about the post-crash care aspects on it. Do you have a functionality in the policing enforcement realm to actually stop speeders? We are often trying to tell countries, stop using education as a panacea for better road safety. So, you know, one quick example, middle-income country in the region that you're dealing with was saying, look, we built this amazing new highway, and it's going out to the coast, and we're still having tremendous amount of fatalities on it. It's because people are speeding, and it's because they're not educated about the dangers of speeding. Education is used time and time again as almost a trade-off when we're talking to ministers as basically the problem in a country. The entire basis of the best performing countries in the world on road safety is they don't rely on human behavior. They don't rely on education as the way to kind of intervene. They're relying on good road safety infrastructure. They're relying on enforcement that works. They're relying on an entire system that is looking at driver licensing, et cetera. So really it's about, it's a trade-off, yes, but it's not a trade-off that doesn't come nowadays with the necessary kind of ways and means to take it on. All the vaccines for road safety are there in the world and ready to be had in a country. What isn't there right now, by and large, again, is the ability to have road safety management systems in countries that are able to kind of oversee these vaccines. So that's a bit of the trade-off for us when we go in, and we're trying to basically show a country that, you know, you can take on things systematically, and then we try to help them in projects take them on systematically.
Thank you. So, I mean, the capacity of the government is critical. Brendan talked briefly also about the role that the private sector can play. Rochelle, what is the role for the NGO community here?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important that the NGOs in a country are well informed and do not advocate for things like education, waste their time, talent, and influence. One of the things we have tried to do is, and successfully, is to establish an alliance of global road safety NGOs worldwide through WHO, and that has been enormously effective, so that NGOs use their time and energy to direct governments to push, to advocate for things that truly make a difference, and not, you know, education and things like that. A strong NGO on the ground that's helped by NGOs all over, really a collaborative effort, is extremely helpful as well.
So I think we can actually, we've got a few minutes for questions from the audience. I think we've got a few microphones in the back. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and just let us know your name and affiliation. So I think we've got one in the back, actually two in the back, so we'll do right there on the aisle first. Thanks.
So Alex Melikishvili, IHS Market. Thank you very much for your informative comments. I was wondering, I have only two questions for you. First, presumably for Kazakh authorities, developing the, particularly those roads that are intended for the transit is supposed to be a top priority. So in your research, as you were conducting your research, I wonder how forthright were the Kazakh authorities with you, with data sharing and other things. I would be very interested to hear that. And the second question is an issue of corruption. I don't think it's for me to tell you that quite often public procurement, infrastructure development, especially in Kazakhstan, is a matter of, well, fund misappropriation, which explains one data point that I brought to this meeting last year. According to the official data, Kazakh authorities spent close to $1 million per kilometer of laying down the highways of first and second categories. So how do you address that corruption issue that is often an impediment to the infrastructure development? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Brendan, I might ask you actually to...
And I'm sure others will chip in. Thank you. It's a very interesting question, and I'll preface that by saying that when we look at countries with stellar safety records, they tend to be countries with all the good kind of hallmarks of sound governance, basically, in terms of openness, in terms of transparency, in terms of stakeholder engagement, etc. And I think it's anyone's assessment whether Kazakhstan meets all of those criteria. The issue of corruption in particular is one that we have tried to address through a number of ways. I think the report identifies that speeding is obviously an issue on the roads in Kazakhstan. We're keenly aware, of course, that as these new roads are being opened, that does tend to lead to situations of speeding, and that the let's say the enforcement processes are not necessarily always as effective as they could be, not just in Kazakhstan, of course, but corruption amongst traffic police is a widespread issue. Technology is catching up, though, fortunately. We're big proponents of automated speed enforcement, so speed cameras, etc., which are very cost effective, take to some extent part of the human equation out of the problem. We have developed, in fact, a model of public-private partnerships that can help introduce these speed cameras, even amongst within those countries that wouldn't necessarily be able to afford them through normal public procurement channels. So these are some of the answers that we could be looking for.
I think I can comment on the first question regarding the data. To be honest, we had a lot of challenges trying to look at the data. We had 4 different resources, and we were trying to find a way on how we can combine all these data in order to start analyzing and come up with really good models. But at the end, we just thought that we can address each data set separately and try to come up with outcomes that would be very helpful for this report. To my understanding, I know that Kazakhstan has been more helpful in terms of how they are making the data available online to all the public and to other agencies. But from my experience and from the experience of the other team members, I think they have to improve the way they report their crashes, the way that they manage their systems in order to record all the roadway information. And also they have to do a lot of auditing. I mean, I think that's really important for them in order to come up with a very good system for managing all that crash database and roadway information. Because in the future, not only they can help analyze the roadway condition nowadays, using the current information, they can develop future models in order to predict crashes that would occur in the near future or 10, 15 years from now. And by that, they can also come up with other countermeasures to address the crash types in certain other areas too.
Great, thank you. And I should add too, I think through the process of doing some of the initial data collection, we learned that there definitely are efforts underway, I think, through the Asian Development Bank and some other multilateral institutions to build some of that capacity, especially for safety audits. And we're also hoping that at some point additional data will become available, and we'd love to update the report with that. So I think I saw one more question in the back there. Yes, sir.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Lee. Thanks for having us. So I have two questions. First, going back to the corruption part, could you share, I think, having these these tools is definitely great, but one of the biggest struggles is adoption within the local governments because procurement is a good source of revenue for many people. So could you share what strategies exist that encourage adoption into the local governments so that they use these tools that are being presented in front of them? And the second question is on rural communities. So a lot of the talk has been on urban highways, but fatalities and crashes also happen in rural areas. So could you share any thoughts on what can be done in rural areas to track both the data but also to improve roads there? Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep, certainly. I was kind of thinking about the rural communities during some of the earlier presentations because, as you know, in Kazakhstan or Russia or other places, there are just vast swaths of land which, frankly, allows for the absolute increase in median speeds. And it's just, again, human nature that when you see these kind of, straight, long highways, you tend to go faster. And it's something that we're very much kind of cognizant on, and when we're talking about road safety strategies, and again, it's one of these trade-off issues, right? Because we're basically trying to address where the greatest fatality statistics are on a network, and a lot of times you find them around ring roads on cities, or in inter-urban highways and things like that. And it is absolutely not to say that we're addressing rural road safety is not an important issue. What we do try to do, and this is where groups, you saw in the program like the International Road Assessment Program, IRAP, which star rates roads. It's not the case all the time that if you have a terrible, section of rural road, that you need to upgrade that road to a 5-star road or even a 3-star road. You have to be very kind of cognizant of where the safety interface needs to occur. And it does need to occur if you need, if you have a two-lane highway out in a rural area and you can afford a medium wire rope barrier, which has been a very proven piece of technology time and time again for preventing crashes and controlling higher speeds of kinetic energy hitting it, and easy to maintain, and then you should install those. The data simply won't necessarily be there from the beginning to make the assessment of where the crashes are occurring in rural areas. But international auditors and hopefully local auditors who have the experience and will talk to the local population in rural areas hopefully can identify the kind of hot spots along with groups like IRAP where you need to make those strategic interventions. And by the way, that also reinforces Rochelle's point about the influence of NGOs. It's not just NGOs in cities, right? NGOs can be located throughout a country, and they frequently are found also in operating in rural areas. And oftentimes, NGOs and the local population are simply the best source of knowledge about where road crashes are occurring. And so it's very incumbent upon the road designers and international development banks and ministries of transport to, if you're in absence of the data, to try and actually get as much possible anecdotal data or anecdotal evidence as possible where the interventions need to occur. So it's certainly an issue that is not adequately addressed worldwide, but it's an important issue, and those are some of the mitigation strategies which can occur to map those, along with the newer kind of satellite technology that we see more frequently employed.
Getting to your point about rural safety, Actually, my master's work mainly focused on assessing rural safety, and I worked with IRAP extensively as well, which is basically US RAP here in the United States. And it's very important not to just look at the crash aspect. I mean, probably in Kazakhstan, 45 to 50% of the people live in rural communities, so it's very important to have proper infrastructure, not only for the roadway aspect, roadway safety aspect, but as well as the connectivity to, the medical emergency facilities, to school, employment centers. But at the same point, when you're trying to talk about rural safety, you don't have to talk about just the crashes. You have to look at the roadway information as well, or other roadway characteristics, and try to come up with a very systematic methodologies on how to start prioritizing your roadway segments and trying to say that, okay, maybe we should address this particular roadway segment this year, and then we would see along the years how that is performing. And I mean, basically, this is what the roadway authorities should be doing, especially living in rural communities. They have to come up with a very efficient, systemic methodology that would not only address, crashes, because in Iowa, where I come from, most of 70% of the crashes occur on the rural roadways, and they're very extensive. So relying on just the crash data is not sufficient. And you would have to look at different aspects, such as, as I said, the roadway characteristics, and try to prioritize these segments.
Thank you. And I know, too, from an economic perspective, some of the rural roads can be challenging because occasionally communities will not be benefiting directly from some of the commerce that's coming through, but they're bearing the risk of those vehicles. And I think one optimistic note, thinking about technology that might be able to be harnessed for sort of second best, it's not a road safety audit, but sort of second best assessments. In addition to satellite imagery, there's now platforms that harness people taking just pictures on their cell phone and package that together. So there's a platform called Mapillary, for example, that allows you to just upload photos, and you get enough people that do that. And there have been instances of communities mapping road networks with that sort of technology. So there's hopefully some optimism there as well. Any other questions?
I should do that. Hi, thanks. That was great. And again, I learned a lot, so terrific. I have two questions. One is about, one of the themes of our Reconnecting Asia project is competing visions, that there are all these countries, China, Japan, India, Turkey, Russia, others playing this sort of infrastructure game and rushing to build stuff across the region. And you can see, some of the signs of that in our map. Is that competition? There seems to me two kinds of competition. There's good competition that creates people, raises standards and gets people to sort of race to the top and incentivizes people to build the best possible, thing or whatever it is. And in this case, good roads. Or there could be a race to the bottom where people are just trying to get stuff done quickly and push through. Do you see that? And maybe this is Mark or Brendan, but do you see any signs of this kind of rush of activity, pushing towards a race to the top or a race to the bottom, or sort of it's neutral? And is this something that we should, if there is a sort of race to the bottom or a risk of that, where there ought to be more conversation among the players involved here, whether through, the G20 or through the OECD or through the World Bank and the multilateral development banks? So that's a sort of more substantive question. And then to George, can you talk a little more about the 1 a.m. phone calls? I mean, the process that you went through here. We're trying to see if this is a good model of doing learning for us. And I'm sure it sounds like you guys made a lot of good friends, and I'm delighted for that outcome. But you normally probably sit in a cubicle or at your desk, alone, doing research for a long period of time. This is a very different model where we're in a team, not together in the room, but connected, and you were working in an 8-week period to pull all this together. Can you? And that's in a sense the same thing. We're doing this for the first time, and not something we normally do. Is it validated as an approach to research? If you had done this alone, sitting at your desk, would you have produced as good results? That'd be very helpful for us to know. Thanks.
Okay, so maybe we'll start with the first one. Okay.
Excellent question. There's definitely a race to the bottom in many cases. There's no easy way to say it. I mean, not to call out a specific country, but there's actually, if you go to the bookstore, there's probably 4 or 5 books on China's infrastructure push in Africa, right? And to be quite frank, and sorry, it's an overused word by specific individuals lately, but some of these roads are a disaster. Yeah, sorry. Some of these roads are an absolute disaster, and you're building inferior, quick build roads which allow for the basic eradication of safety features because speed is enabled, right? So it's very easy when you're trying to have when you're working on a deal to build a port and get raw materials from the mine to the port to say to a government, we're going to build you some new roads, and that's going to increase your access. And building an all-weather good road is absolutely one of the best investments you can have for economic development. But building a poorly designed road which allows for people to create communities around this road which don't have the necessary infrastructure interventions to stop vulnerable road users from being killed or allow for strong speed is a race to the bottom, and it's very much happening across the world. The issue of getting this subject on the G20 radar or the G7, it's something that the international road safety community has been pushing for a very, very, very long time. And when you see issues crop up periodically like Ebola or the tsunami in 2004 in Asia, these are, not to diminish these issues, these are very serious issues. But quite frankly, they are minuscule in comparison to the number of road deaths that are occurring globally every year. There's a human psychology and political economy issue with road safety which we haven't had the breakthrough yet on it. And if someone in this room finds the psychological barrier to pass through to get it on the radar screens of the international community, you'd be doing a great service for humankind. So quite frankly, there are ministers want to open roads, and they want to say within the lifespan of their tenure in office that they've opened a road. Whether or not they have the ability to actually understand what the consequences of opening that road are, if it hasn't been addressed from a safety perspective, is an entirely different thing. So, unfortunately, with few exceptions in the best performing countries, there is a race to the bottom. Final point: places like France and others. France is a great example. Overnight, there was the political will occurring because the President of France, Chirac, basically said in 2004-ish, I think, this is a major issue for our country. I want to see things done. Enforcement increased overnight. There was better attention to the issue generally, and France saw a great reduction in fatalities. So it can be done with political leadership, and we just don't have it on this issue.
Just to absolutely wholeheartedly support everything I've just heard. You also have to kind of work with the financiers of these different initiatives, whether it's the China Development Bank, the Export-Import Bank, or the newly created Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and some of them have been, I think it's fair to say, more or less responsive. Actually, AIB, I believe, has recruited a number of staff from the other development banks, including the World Bank. So I'm hoping that some of these practices will filter down to the project level, and that these safeguards will effectively be in place. I think it's also important to work with a number of representative organisations, like an organisation like the Chinese International Contractors Association, which represents the major Chinese road builders, is also an excellent interlocutor. And these the awareness needs to be built with those entities. Just to finally add that I think there was a very interesting initiative that was actually announced by the World Bank maybe just 2 weeks ago, to push with the creation of regional road safety observatories. You could imagine one being created for Central Asia. There's kind of a proto-observatory in place in the Balkans, which is also receiving a lot of Chinese investments these days, and they already have a number of safety working groups in place, and that's a good way of creating a healthy level of benchmarking and competition. I've attended a number of these meetings, and you have high-ranking officials come in and present their last year's road safety results, etc. So I think the observatories might be a good way to create the healthy kind of competitive drive that you're looking for.
All right, so talking about my personal experience getting involved in this project, it has been great. I loved it, to be honest. It had its challenges. When I learned that
We'll still give you lunch if...
Oh, no.
No.
When I heard from CSIS that I was the team leader for the research team, I was like, oh boy, now reality struck me, and I was very worried because, trying to handle a massive project on a national scale, I had my concerns. But to be honest, I got the support from CSIS. They were constantly helping us out. They were always reaching out to us, asking us questions, or, they were catering to our needs, actually. And then considering that, I'm a PhD student and I have to focus on my research first and then work on this on the side. So yes, UNZI was also very collaborative. Towards the end of the day, we would be like, okay, we text each other. Now it's time to talk about the project. And I think there's also the time difference between the Central and Eastern time. So 12 a.m. was the perfect time to have these conversations. And we would always, start noting down all the strategies that we're going to follow, what questions are we going to ask, what are the tasks that we're going to give to our team members, and we'll also divide them into different groups as well. So it was very helpful, in my opinion, and also, as I said, proper communication is the key. So I think sometimes email is not always the perfect way. Maybe email is the perfect way just to send the information. But with the new technology and having your cell phones, we were using WhatsApp group. And whenever I asked them to do a task, they were immediately on to their task. They were always giving me timely feedback. And also knowing from CSIS, they had their own schedule. That helped a lot. Maybe it was short, it was tight. Maybe if we had a little bit more time, that would have been perfect, considering, we were given the project almost end of March, and when we had to submit everything early May. We also had our final exams, and, it was towards the end of the semester. But it turned out to be great. Later on, you would hear the experience from the other team members, but it was great so far.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for successfully juggling all of that, and thank you as well to the other researchers. And if you would just join me in thanking them and our panelists, please. Thank you.